Pinkie Pie had gone to sleep. Octavia remained wakeful, eyes hooded but focused on everything around them. So it was that when a pair of new griffins arrived and spoke to the guards, she was the first to sense something was amiss. Her heart skittered when several sets of baleful eyes turned in their direction, but the griffins did not pounce on her and Pinkie responsibly. Instead, one of the guards stalked forward with a purpose into a crowd of dismayed ponies. Octavia was wondering whatever would look more or less suspicious to leap her into feet, and whatever the risk of not following every pony else's lead was worth exposing Pinkie Pie. When a familiar wail went up. "What are you doing? Where are you taking me?" The guard reappeared, walking on his hind legs, with a blue pale mare across his forelegs. Her elaborate yellow hairdo fell across her face as she struggled and wailed while trying to avoid his upturned claws. "Take this one," the guard said over to the den. "Please take this one. It keeps making that awful noise. It's driving me insane." "No!" The mare kicked harder, but the guard passed her to one of the new griffins with a sigh of relief. "We need two," said another newcomer, a female whose feathers were red as a robin's chest. "Orders were for us to fetch 2 earth ponies." The guard grinned eagerly. "I know just the one." He but all dived back into the crowd of ponies, scattering them like a fox among rabbits. He came back up with a bigger pony that struggled even harder than the mare. Release me, you ruffian," said the gray stallion. "Can it, pony?" the guard snapped. His grip was poorer, since the stallion was so much bigger than the mare. Eventually he gripped the scruff on the stallion's neck with one claw, at the base of his tail with the other, charting him across the concert hall like he was a bouncer, and the stallion was about to eject it from a club. "What do you want from them for?" The red griffin shrugged, as if he couldn't care less. "The orders came from Stargazer, so probably it has something to do with His Majesty." One of the guards stiffened. "These 2 are for King Claw or Stargazer?" He shivered. Octavia wondered who the Stargazer character was to elect that some kind of reaction from a swaggering bully like her guard. No one would ever want to meet, that was for certain. The red griffin accepted the stallion by clamping on a heavy collar around his neck and dragging him off. When the stallion tried to fight her, he cuffed his ears, though she kept her claws carefully averted. Evidently, she was to deliver him to the mare undamaged. Something roiled in Octavia's gut, a sensation like she had eaten fermented grass or cordial left out in the sun too long. "Octavia?" She looked down to see Pinkie Pie, who was watching the mare and stallion leading them away, him glowering and her sobbing. "Where are Ritzy and Vangorolus going?" Octavia blinked. "You remember their names?" Panic washed over her. What else did she remember? Pinkie Pie was in her natural state, was a bundle of energy and joy, but the same energy was uncontrollable and adapt together to her notice, and then killed a situation like this. I was listening to them talk before. The only door that shut was when she met Octavia's gaze. Her blue eyes were full of worry and confusion. "Ritzy's always crying and Vangorolus is always telling her to shut up. He's really mean. I don't like him. But I don't like the idea that he's in much trouble because of it. Do you think they're going to get punished for being naughty?" A simplicity of the question floored Octavia. I don't know. My teacher at school keeps giving me detentions when I talk in class, but I can't help it. I like making my classmates laugh. She never sees it that way. I don't like Miss Hackney. I wish I was still in Miss Cheerley's class. She was my teacher when I first joined school, and she was really kind to me, because I started after every pony else." Pinkie Pie frowned, scrunching up her battered face in thought. We were in the same school at class, Octavia?" Octavia swallowed. The story she had fed to Pinkie Pie was a jumblification. as she now tried to pass her off involved and fabricated the friendship outside of school. She had drawn out her childhood in Trondheim for details, reasoning that the small town like hers couldn't be that far removed from life in Ponyville. She hadn't even thought about school or the fact that the minor details from Pinkie Pie's past would filter in the mind at the worst possible moments. No duplication. We're not. She fought up an excuse quickly. I'm older than you, remember? Oh! Pinkie Pie's frown cleared. Clearly this was enough to expunge the discrepancies in mine had thrown up so far. Did you have Miss Hackney last year? She's been at school for, ever. Of course I did. But do you really want to talk about school right now? I guess not. The frown returned to full force. Do you think Ritzy and Vangoloris will be okay? I'm sure they'll be fine. They're probably just going to get, detention or something. They'll be made to clean the chalkboards and weed the gardens for being so loud and rude to each other. Miss Hackney makes me clap the chalkboard erasers together to get the dust off. I hate that job. It makes me sneeze, and I crash into stuff when I sneeze. She gingerly touched her swollen snout. Did I crash into something that make my face hurt this bad? Something like that. Griffin fists. Most likely, really. It was a wonder Pinkie Pie was still alive. Octavia couldn't ask her how she had accomplished it, since that would involve pointing it out to her that she was older than she thought, and had been a bloody skirmish with her captivers, likely lost all of her friends as well as the chance of ever going home. She didn't know what kind of sudden mental trauma would do to any pony, and Pinkie Pie was far from any pony. Until she could figure out what their next move should be, Octavia resolved to keep Pinkie Pie in her little fantasy so as to keep her safe, as she felt unpleasant about the untruths. Well then, that was just something she would have to live with. Can I have a drink of water? Pinkie Pie asked plaintively. Not in the moment, Jubilication. Why not? There isn't any. Still? Pinkie gave a stupendous pout. Those griffins are meanie poops. Octavia blocked for a moment. Meanie poops? Uh-huh. They're mean in their poopy heads. They're always so meanie poops. She crossed her front hooves and laid her chin on them, still pouting. Meanie poops. Octavia watched her for a moment despite the gravity of their situation. She had a sudden urge to laugh that she only just managed to squish. Clearing her throat, she crossed down her own hooves and mimicked Pinkie Pie's posture, trying to fade into the background while also keeping an eye on every pony and every griffin around them. Gilda pulled up a short at the doors into the throne room. Her way was barreled by two griffins, a buck and a hen, both considerably larger than her. They refused to even glance at her as she approached. Their only acknowledgement was a downward flick of their eyes when she was right in front of them, before they went right back to ignoring her. I have something for King Claw, she said, suddenly realizing how stupid that sounded. Why hadn't she found one of the other captains if she didn't want to speak to Captain Ripper again? Why had she bypassed all the same ideas and gone straight for the big cheese? King Claw had better things to do than to give her an audience. She had been made not after talking to the dragon. It had impaired to her judgment. She couldn't hold back down, though. Not now, with these two arrogant feather bags dissing her like this. To distract herself from her own idiocy, and she held out a covered bird cage she had discovered in a side room, judging by the big honking portrait on the wall and the private letters scattered across the floor and table. She presumed the room was part of Celestia's private chambers. Might even have been where the poisoners had found their masks. The cage had been empty on a stand, its previous occupant, if there had to be one, long since departed. Gilda wondered whether it had been taken off by some griffin to be prepared into a meal for His Majesty, parrot à l'orange, canary parfait, or, knowing King Claw's rustic tastes, simply roast parakeet. Tried to avoid the little dragon's gaze, she had pulled over the perch and fashioned it into a muzzle. then shoved the dragon inside, fastening the door and covered it with sheet. It made the carrying much easier. The two griffins didn't even bother to look at the cages she held out. Stung, Gilda stepped forward to pass between their bodies and opened the huge doors behind them. The female stuck out a wing to block her and finally designed it to glare at the empty space. Her feathers were a beautiful mix of different shades of red that made her gold eyes stand out like the center of a flame. By comparison, the buck's brown and white feathers looked dowdy. "His Majesty is not to be disturbed," said the hen. Gilda then stopped. "Says who?" "Someone who is more important than you." She riled at this and automatically started puffing up her chest and back feathers like an angry cat. "Don't even try it," the hen snapped, rolling her eyes in disgust. "I could squash you like a rotten egg, underling." The emblem of the underling displayed on her own vest burned like a hot brand. Gilda resisted the urge to cover up the evidence of how much lower than the latter she was than everyone else. She then had left flight school. She had been full of dreams and big ideas of how she was going to make her mark in the world. She, Dash, and their egos were going to take Equestria by storm until their names were famous and everyone knew who they were. Well, Equestria had sure been taken by storm, but here she was, anonymous in the crush of the over-eager warmongers, while Dash was... "Will you just push it off?" The hen scooped one massive wing towards Gilda, literally pushing her away. "King Claw isn't going to see you. Why would you ever think he'd want to speak to an underling?" Gilda skipped backwards to avoid the red wing. Much like swans, a griffin's wing could break bones if it hit without enough force. "I have this for..." "He's not going to see you," the buck interrupted. "Get that through your thick skull. No wonder you're just an underling. Complicated thoughts are really beyond you low rankers, aren't they?" Was it a quirk of nature that griffins born in Griffonia were genetically predisposed to be assholes? Gilda had yet to be met one for whom being civil was not a foreign concept. The closet was Captain Ripper, and something about the way he had complimented her made her deeply aware of her secrets as well as her shortcomings and keen to avoid his company. It was too bad that he was her commanding officer. She was more of him than any griffin else. "You're not getting in there," said the hen irritably, shotting her companion a dirty look. She clearly thought she was more important than the two of them and didn't appreciate him interrupting her. "So get lost. I'm sure there's some gutter with your name on it that needs scraping out." Gilda fought the desire to launch at her brawl when the hen was larger, brainier, and higher rank, but a more powerful opponent that never stopped Gilda before. One time in flight school, when she was still in her first semester, she had taken on a senior and won. She remembered cannoning across the stormball field after he kicked a practically nasty rain cloud into her gym class and fired all the tails of several meek classmates. They all scattered in fear, which he had found it hilarious until Gilda punched him in the nose. He hadn't been defending them, but the nerve of some pony thinking that he could just get away with something like that had made her blood boil, until common sense took over a vacation later. Outside the principal's office, she had been plunked as next to the filly with a bleeding lip and realized that it was the rainbow-haired freak she had fought on the first day. The filly had leapt into a fray to try and keep her from getting her tail kicked by his senior teammates, even though she would have hated Gilda's guts after the first encounter. She had thrust out her hoof for Gilda to shake, and the way she introduced herself remained with the Gilda to this day. "I'm Rainbow Dash. Don't forget it. Someday I'm going to be the most famous flyer in Equestria, and you could say I knew her before she was famous, but not before she was kick-ass." Gilda's throat constricted. The memory disappeared and her desire to kick tail died when the double doors opened and both hen and buck guards arched the attention like they have been carved from the store. "What's going on out there?" said a semblant voice. "Stargazer, sir," the hen barked. "We're just sending this underling away, sir." The aged griffin slipped through the narrow gap, closing the doors behind him. He slunk into the stand behind the guards, although his single eye was fixated on Gilda. An underling? His voice drew out the last syllable as if he was savoring it. Her heart skipped a beat. She had never heard him talk or seen him this close before. But every griffin in the Claw army knew who Stargazer was. Magic was so rare in griffins it was impossible not to know about him and the other three with powers who served him under. No one had ever confirmed it to Gilda, but the rumor was that those three were responsible for the poisoning of Celestia and Luna, since they were the only ones to be able to slip into Canterlot when the princesses were at full power. Moreover, rumor said that Stargazer's orders that they also had managed to steal the elements of harmony, ancient artifacts whose sole purpose was to protect Equestria from harm. Without Stargazer and his assassins, the entire invasion would not have happened. And now here he was, standing in front of her looking expectant. He kept his face turned sideways so that his good eye could focus properly on her and the cage in her claw. "Why was the underling trying to see His Majesty?" Stargazer asked. His voice sounded like dead leaves blowing across the concrete. What would prompt to be a large breach in protocol? Simply stupidity or some other reason? The buck fumbled. "She said she had something for him, sir," the hen replied. "What that might be?" "We didn't ask, sir." "Didn't you think such a flagrant breaking of rank was odd for an underling to try?" Now the hen fumbled as well. Stargazer came forward, eyeballing the covered cage. "What do you have here, underling?" Suddenly, despite the dislike of the little dragon and her eagerness to be rid of him, Gilda tightened her grip on the cage. It was irrational and ridiculous, but she didn't want to hand it over. This grizzled old griffin was nowhere near a threat to physically. It was as something else about him that was setting warning bells ringing in her head. Something deep in her gut told her that giving him Twilight Sparkle's dragon would be a very, very bad idea. She unconsciously pulled the cage back towards her own chest. It's nothing, sir. Totally not important. I'm sorry I wasted your time." She bowed and backed off, as if it were proper etiquette. "Halt, underling," Stargazer said quietly. She froze and took a hold of the sheet and pulled it aside. When he saw the purple dragon and his eyes rounded in delight. "A dragon hatchling? Where did you find this?" It was hiding. I found it by, accident." Gilda glanced at the dragon, which was no longer looking at her but at Stargazer. It was still furious, attested by its smoking nostrils, but no longer looked quite as sure as itself when it was yelling at her. It sensed Stargazer's dangerouses too. "Celestia certainly had some interesting pets," Stargazer breathed. He let out a claw, clearly expecting her to fork over the cage. Gilda hesitated for a moment before reluctantly acquiescing. Her stomach coiled like a basket of overturned snakes she had felt when she had just made the terrible mistake. "I shall keep a hold of this one until His Majesty has more of a mind to think about it." He lifted his gaze to her thoughtfully. "What is your name, underling?" Gilda, sir." His frown, she added, Goldfeather. Goldfeather. Stargazer turned her name over like a cat, inspecting something interesting. Goldfeather. An old name, but a respectable one. Her parents had given her an equestrian name, but every griffin she told it more focused on her sure name, since it was more akin to their kind by naming system. If she had been committed to that cause, she would have given herself totally being Goldfeather, but instead she stubbornly held on to Gilda. It was meant to decorate it with gold and oldie equestrian. By the sound of it, it appealed to her dad alongside his great, however many times great-grandfather's name. Goldfeather had been turned into a family surname by subsequent generations. Griffins didn't even bother with the first names and surnames, since the population of Griffonia was so small, and every griffin mother tried to think of a new and fearsome names for their offspring to make them stand out. Gilda was oddity, but couldn't bring herself to discard this last part of their pre-Claw army identity. If she had been more in mind, she might have examined this. but she wasn't and didn't. A stargazer gave her a sudden brilliant smile. You could see how he might have been a handsome buck in his youth, but now he was withered and twisted. His back was hunched and his stance was terrible, but he moved with incoherent speed and grace. Something about him reminded Gilda of a still oil flick floating on the water with a strong current beneath. The skin around the base of the gullet, her feathers prickled uncomfortably, even though Stargazer's expression was obstinately friendly. "Thank you for the gift, underling Godfeather," he purred. "I won't forget this." He then turned and went back through the doors to the throne room without another word. He was so much higher in the rank than her, and he didn't need to worry about showing her his tail, nor did he look back, but he did pause to flip the sheet back over the cage before entering the throne room. Gilda felt sick to her stomach, so she couldn't move fast enough with the hen guard swept a wing at her again. Instead, she staggered and nearly fell over. "Beat it," the hen snarled, clearly embarrassed that she had been made to look foolish in front of her superior. She had abandoned all presence and aloofness and allowed her emotions to blaze through. "Go on, get lost, or I'll rip you a new colon." Gilda fluffed up again, feathers on end. She came up to the hen's shoulders. "Try it," chuckles. The hen planted claws and paws in a fighting stance. "Gladly." "Don't," the buck said. "She's not worth it. We're on duty. Don't throw yourself away and honor on some stupid little underling." He spat the word out, as many others would say dog dirt. "Do what she says and get lost," he added to Gilda. Gilda eyed them both, and then, to their increasing anger, turned off and flew off, swishing her tail impotently as she went. High in the rafters, a pair of pupilless golden eyes watched the scene unfold. They took in exchange the posturing and a handover, and finally retrieved the presumptuous smaller griffin. The owner of the eyes had never met any of these creatures before, but they were all intruders and thus all enemies, big or small. Despite being flyers, the griffins rarely looked up, so the owner of the gold eyes was able to open her wings and glide silently away without being noticed. She knew this castle was better than any of them, and knew how to get around undetected. She had often evaded the royal guards when she got bored and went exploring without her permission. Her ancient brain worked on the problem now it laid before her, while her young eyes searched out more information on every one of these intruders were doing in her territory. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload, so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.